The mechanic lived in a crumbling repair yard on the edge of a forgotten colony world, his hands always stained with oil and his lungs heavy with the dust that hung in the dry air each morning. He dragged himself out of a narrow bunk and stepped into the dim light of the yard, where rusting parts lay in piles like broken bones. He had once dreamed of designing ships, of flying across the stars, of building a life worthy of the stories he heard as a boy, but those dreams had been swallowed by debt and by the endless grind of survival. The colony was not a place of hope, it was a graveyard for those who had nowhere else to go. Merchants passed through on their way to wealthier systems, smugglers sold trinkets in shadowed corners, and workers like him fought over scraps of labor just to eat his shop. Barely survived, held together by stubbornness and the rare jobs that came his way. He worked with tools so old their handles cracked in his hands, but he could not afford better. He was known for being able to fix almost anything, but skill did not fill a belly when customers were re-rat. Night, when the repair yard fell silent, he often sat alone beside an engine block, staring at the stars that burned faintly through the dusty atmosphere. He wondered what it would be like to escape, to drift away into the void with nothing but the hum of a ship to guide him, but he knew he would never afford such freedom. Each credit he earned vanished into debts owed to suppliers, into food to keep his body working, into rent for the small patch of metal and dirt that passed as a ship. The mechanic kept his head low and his words few. He avoided the gambling dens where men lost what little they had. He avoided the taverns where bitterness poured heavier than drink. He survived by working, by holding fast to the belief that tomorrow might bring a ship in need of repair, a job that could keep him going a little longer. But deep inside, he feared he was trapped forever in a cycle that offered no escape, that others in town barely noticed him. The mechanic was simply part of the background, a quiet man in grease stained overalls who could be counted on to work hard and say little. He never boasted, he never asked for more than he was given. But sometimes, when the light of the twin suns fell across his tired face, a flicker of something old stirred in his eyes, the faint glimmer of the boy who once believed he might build wonders. He did not know that his life was about to change. He did not know that beyond the horizon of dust and rust a ship was descending that would test not only his hands but his heart, and that, in the darkness of space, an empire waited, tied unknowingly to the fate of a struggling mechanic, on a forgotten world. One evening, as the twin suns sank beneath the jagged horizon, and the colony was washed in the dull glow of rust-colored light, the mechanic sat outside his shop, wiping grease from his hands. He expected the night to be like every other, silent, empty, and heavy with the weight of exhaustion, but then he saw it, a streak of silver cutting through the sky, a vessel unlike any he had ever witnessed. Trailing sparks that shimmered like dying stars. As it descended, the ground trembled lightly as the ship came down just beyond the edge of town. It did not crash yet. Its landing was clumsy. Awkward smoke coiled up from vents along the hull, and strange blue sparks danced across its surface. The mechanic froze, his breath caught in his throat, for he had seen hundreds of ships in his life, some heavy with cargo, some sleek with speed, but nothing like this. Its design was too smooth, too elegant, its shape unfamiliar, as though it belonged to another age or another world entirely. Curiosity pulled him to his feet, his tired legs carrying him across the dusty plain, toward the glow. The closer he came, the stronger the air hummed with energy. It tingled against his skin and raised the hairs on his arms like invisible electricity. The ship was alive in a way that unsettled him. Panels pulsed faintly, as though breathing, with light runes traced along the hull, in patterns he could not recognize, glowing with a rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat. He hesitated at the edge of the clearing, his instincts urging caution. Ships like this did not belong here, in a colony forgotten by most of the galaxy. Whoever owned such a vessel would not be an ordinary traveler, but desperation weighed heavier than fear. His shop had no customers, his cupboards were nearly bare, and here stood a chance, perhaps the only chance he had, to make enough to keep himself alive a little longer. The hatch opened with a hiss of silver light spilling onto the ground, and from the glow stepped a figure cloaked in deep blue fabric. The mechanic felt his chest tighten as he saw her, her movements graceful, her presence steady. Though she said nothing, at first she carried herself with a calm strength that did not match the desperation of her ship. She looked not like a passenger stranded, but like someone in control of every step she took. At last, she spoke, her voice soft and even, yet carrying a weight that stirred something in him. She asked if he could repair her vessel, offering payment that sounded almost impossible for a single job. He searched her face, trying to read her eyes, but they revealed nothing, only patience and quiet authority. He knew he should question her. He knew there was danger hidden here, but hunger and survival left little Room for caution. He nodded slowly, agreeing to take the job, and as he stepped closer to the strange vessel, he felt as though he was walking not only toward work but toward a turning point in his life, one he could not yet understand. The mechanic stood before the vessel, its hull still glowing faintly with strange light, his fingers brushing over the smooth surface that felt neither like metal nor stone. It was warm beneath, his touch pulsing as though alive. He had repaired countless freighters, patched together smugglers' ships, and even a few military crafts, but this was different. This was something beyond human design, beyond anything he had imagined, and for a moment he wondered if he was truly capable of fixing it. The woman stood nearby, silent, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders, though she did not seem cold. Her eyes followed his every movement, steady, calm, yet piercing. He could feel her gaze, like weight pressing on him as he crouched by an access panel. Fumbling for tools, she said nothing, but her presence was constant, like a shadow he could not ignore. It made his hands tremble, though. He told himself it was only the strangeness of the ship, not the woman herself. When he pried open the panel, a glow spilled out, filling the night with shimmering blue light wires, coiled within, not in straight lines but in intricate patterns that reminded him of veins or roots. The circuits pulsed with faint energy, resisting the pull of his tools, as if the ship itself was aware of his intrusion. He drew back momentarily, his heart pounding, but the thought of credits and survival pushed him forward. He could not allow fear to stop him, not now. He bent closer, sweat dripping down his forehead as he adjusted his grip. He began working carefully, testing connections, listening to the hum of the vessel like a doctor, listening to the heartbeat of a patient. The woman stepped nearer, her voice soft as she asked how long the repairs might take. The mechanic answered roughly, estimating, though in truth he had no idea. He had never touched technology like this before, but he would not admit weakness, not when his pride and his hunger were both at stake. She tilted her head, studying him, as though his words mattered less than his determination. Her silence afterward spoke volumes. He returned to work, his hands moving with instinct rather than knowledge, feeling rather than logic. When a circuit sparked against his palm, he flinched but steadied himself. Gritting his teeth, he refused to show doubt. The night deepened around them, stars burning faintly overhead while the colony slept, unaware of the encounter unfolding at its edge. The mechanic labored without rest, the woman watching quietly, sometimes shifting slightly as though debating whether to speak, but always falling back into silence. He could not shake the feeling that she was testing him, not only his ability to repair, but something deeper, perhaps his endurance, his will, his refusal to quit. When at last he leaned back to catch his breath, he glanced at her briefly, and for a heartbeat he saw something in her eyes. Not cold calculation but curiosity, maybe even respect. It vanished quickly, hidden behind her calm expression, yet it stayed with him, fueling a strange fire in his chest. He returned to the ship with renewed focus, unaware that every move he made was weaving him deeper into a story far larger than himself, a story whose scale reached beyond the colony, beyond the stars, beyond anything he could comprehend. The mechanic pressed deeper into the vessel, each system stranger than the last. The more he worked, the more it felt as though he was not repairing a machine, but tending to a living creature. The wires were not wires at all, but glowing strands that flexed beneath his grip. The circuits shimmered with fluid light, flowing like streams across hidden channels. Every adjustment he made seemed to cause the ship to react, not with simple sparks, but with pulses like shivers running across its surface. He wiped sweat from his brow, his tools slipping in his tired hands, yet he refused to stop. He knew this job could change everything. He had been struggling for scraps for too long. This payment could free him from debt, it could give him hope, but more than that, pride burned within him. He would not fail, not while the woman still watched him so closely. The woman moved nearer, her cloak brushing lightly against the dust, her presence as steady as the stars above. Sometimes she asked quiet questions, her voice like a calm current in the storm. She asked where he had learned his craft, and he answered with blunt honesty. He had never learned from books or teachers, only from trial and error, from breaking things and forcing them back into shape. She listened intently, her eyes never leaving him, and though her words were few, he felt a strange warmth in her silence, as if she valued his raw determination more than polished skill. The systems resisted him more with every layer he uncovered. One connection led to another, more complex than the last. The deeper he went, the more he doubted his own understanding. The vessel hummed and throbbed beneath his touch like it was aware of his intrusion, and sometimes he thought he heard faint whispers of sound within the circuits, like voices just beyond hearing. He shook the thought away, blaming exhaustion, but unease lingered. His arms ached, his back throbbed, but he pushed on. Hours, slipping by, unnoticed. The woman remained by his side, offering no instruction, no interference, only her steady gaze and occasional quiet words of encouragement. He began to feel her presence, less as pressure, and more as support. Though he did not understand why, her eyes seemed to search him as though every choice he made told her something she wanted to know. At one point, a surge of energy burst from a panel, nearly throwing him backward, but he steadied himself, refusing to yield. He bit down on his frustration, gripped his tool tighter, and forced the system into order. Sparks flew across the night sky and the vessel groaned, but slowly. The hum of its core grew steadier, more even. He felt a rush of triumph, but hid it beneath a mask of focus. The woman smiled faintly, a smile so subtle he almost missed it, and in that moment the mechanic felt a strange spark within himself, not only pride but something deeper, a connection. He could not explain, he did not know who she truly was, and he did not know why she watched him so carefully, but he sensed that his struggle mattered to her in ways far beyond the repair of a broken ship. The mechanic reached the heart of the vessel, and for the first time he felt true fear. The chamber before him glowed with shifting light, like a storm frozen in a crystal sphere. The patterns of energy twisted and spiraled as though alive, and every instinct in his body told him that one wrong move could burn him to ash. He had worked on engines that roared like beasts and power cores that threatened to explode with every touch, but nothing like this, nothing that seemed to breathe with its own will. He knelt close, his fingers trembling slightly as he adjusted his tools. The hum of the ship vibrated through his chest so strongly he could feel it in his bones. The woman stood behind him, silent, yet her presence loomed heavy in the air, her eyes sharp as if she already knew the risks he faced. She did not tell him what to do, she did not guide him. She only watched and waited, as though his struggle was the answer she had been seeking. The systems were unlike any he had ever known. The strands of energy resisted his touch, sparking with heat whenever his tools came near. He tried again and again, adjusting his grip, testing connections, pulling back when the pulses grew violent. Sweat poured down his face, his muscles cramped, but he refused to surrender. He could not afford failure, not here. Not now. This was more than survival now. This was a battle between his will and a machine that felt alive. At one point the circuits flared, blinding him in a flash of blue light, forcing him to close his eyes, yet his hands continued to move, guided by instinct. He could no longer rely on sight. He had to feel the patterns in the heat of the strands and the vibrations in the metal. He worked blindly, his mind sharpening in the darkness, trusting his intuition to carry him through, and to his shock the systems began to settle, as though they recognized his persistence. The woman stepped closer, her cloak brushing lightly against the floor. She spoke at last, her voice calm but carrying an edge that made his breath catch. She told him that most men would have given up by now, most would have fled from such danger. Yet he remained steady. Even when blinded by light, he did not know what to say to her. He only muttered that he had no choice, that survival left no room for weakness. But she seemed to hear something deeper in his words, as though they revealed more about him than he realized. The chamber dimmed slowly, the sphere of energy settling into a steady glow. The strands of light no longer lashed out, but instead pulsed gently, like a heart returning to rhythm. He exhaled heavily, his arms weak from the strain, yet triumph burned in his chest. He had done what he thought impossible. The woman regarded him with quiet intensity, her eyes holding secrets he could not read in that moment. He felt both pride and unease, pride for what he had achieved, and unease for the sense that she had seen something in him. He did not yet understand, something she had been searching for, perhaps all along. The mechanic slumped against the side of the glowing chamber, his hands shaking from hours of relentless labor, his chest heaving with every breath, though exhaustion dragged at his body. He could not allow himself to rest for long. The ship still throbbed with uneven energy, and he knew the work was not yet finished. He dragged himself upright, gripping his tools with stiff fingers, determined to continue, because stopping meant failure, and failure was something he had never allowed himself. Even when the odds stood against him, the woman moved closer, her cloak shifting as she stepped into the soft blue glow, her eyes fixed on him with a quiet weight. She asked him simple questions, yet her voice carried layers he could not name. She asked why he had chosen this life of broken ships and forgotten parts, why he remained on a colony that seemed abandoned by the galaxy, why he still fought so hard when every day offered so little reward. He frowned, wiping sweat from his brow, muttering that he had no choice, that a man did what he must to survive. Her gaze lingered on him, as though searching his words for something more. He tried to ignore it, returning to the vessel, opening another panel and feeling the hum of power. run through his fingertips. He worked steadily, though his muscles screamed with fatigue, his mind turning over her questions. He wanted to tell her about the dreams he once held, of building ships that soared across the stars, of leaving the dust behind, of becoming someone more than a struggling mechanic, but he buried the thought deep. He could not share such weakness with a stranger still. She pressed gently, her voice low yet persistent. She asked if he truly believed survival was enough, if a life built only on endurance could satisfy a man like him. He felt irritation flare inside him, but also confusion, for her words struck deeper than he wished. He snapped that endurance was all he had left. Dreams were for men who had more than debt, who had more than hunger. But even as he spoke, he felt the hollow weight of the truth settle in his chest. The woman did not argue, she only tilted her head, her eyes softening in a way that unsettled him more than her sharpness ever had. She seemed to see something in him, something he had long buried, and it made him uneasy because he sensed she knew him better than he knew himself. He turned away, focusing again on the ship, on the work, on the only thing that gave him a sense of control. As he connected strands of pulsing light, he caught her watching him, not with impatience, but with a strange, quiet respect. Her expression, unreadable yet powerful in its calm. The ship responded slowly, its hum smoothing into steadier rhythms, and for the first time he felt not only that he was repairing it, but that it was accepting him, as though it recognized his relentless spirit. He pushed forward through the ache, through the doubt, refusing to stop. Because to stop would be to surrender, and surrender was something he had never allowed himself. Her questions lingered in his mind, though he tried to push them away, and he did not know it yet, but those questions would shape the choices he would soon have to face. The night stretched on, and the mechanic forced himself to keep moving, his arms heavy, his mind clouded by fatigue, yet a strange fire burned in his chest. He could see the end of the work within reach, the final systems of the vessel sparking weakly before him like faint stars waiting to be reignited. He steadied his hands and pushed forward, each connection a battle against exhaustion, each movement a statement of his refusal to break. The woman stood close, her presence no longer distant, but almost companion-like, though she still spoke little. When she did, her words carried weight. She told him he had already done more than most men could. She told him that his persistence was rare and valuable. He shook his head, muttering that he was only doing what had to be done, that survival left him no other choice. But she seemed unconvinced, her eyes never leaving him, her gaze cutting through the walls he tried to build around himself. As he worked, the ship responded more than before, its panels glowing brighter, its hum smoothing into a rhythm that pulsed with life. It felt as though the vessel recognized his effort, as though it acknowledged him, not as an intruder but as a healer. His tools sparked against living circuits, yet instead of resistance, the systems welcomed his touch, aligning themselves with his stubborn will. He felt a surge of pride, though he hid it behind a mask of grim focus. Finally he reached the last set of connections, the most delicate of all strands of light, twisting together like threads of fire. One mistake here could undo everything. He steadied his hands, breathing deeply, and let instinct guide him. His eyes burned with fatigue, but his determination sharpened. He aligned the final pieces, pressed them into place, and for a moment nothing happened. Silence filled the air, heavy enough to crush him. Then the vessel awakened fully. Light burst across its surface, flowing in patterns like rivers of stars. The hum of its core swelled into a steady song that shook the ground beneath his feet. The mechanic stumbled back, shielding his eyes as the ship came, alive, energy coursing through every panel, every circuit glowing, as though the night itself had been banished by its presence. He turned toward the woman, expecting relief or gratitude, but what he saw instead unsettled him. Her cloak shimmered faintly in the glow, her eyes blazing with power. No ordinary traveler carried such presence, no stranded passenger bore such strength. She looked taller, brighter, her shadow stretching long across the clearing. She smiled faintly, and in that smile was something ancient, something commanding. Though she said nothing, he felt the truth pressing at the edges of his mind. The mechanic stood frozen, his chest heaving, his hands still trembling from the effort. He did not understand what he had seen, but he knew the woman before him was not who she claimed to be. And though she gave him no answers, he sensed he had passed some unseen trial, one that meant more than survival, more than payment, one that tied him to a fate he could not yet imagine. The clearing was bathed in the glow of the awakened vessel, its light shimmering across the barren ground like ripples of starlight. The mechanic stood still, his tools heavy in his hands, his chest rising and falling with every exhausted breath. He had done it. He had restored life to a ship that seemed beyond repair, and yet instead of triumph, All he felt was a strange emptiness, a hollow ache deep in his chest, as though the end of the struggle had left him with nothing to hold on to. The woman moved toward the vessel, her cloak brushing lightly against the dust, her presence now undeniable. Every step she took radiated quiet strength. Her eyes glimmered in the light of the ship, carrying a depth he could not measure. She looked back at him once more, and for a fleeting instant her expression softened, her gaze lingering as though she wanted to say something she did not. But when she spoke, her words were simple, calm. She thanked him for his effort, her voice warm yet edged with power. He nodded, trying to hide the weight pressing in his chest. He muttered that it was nothing, that it was only a job, though the words felt false even as he said them. He knew this was unlike any job he had ever taken, and her gratitude, though brief, stirred something inside him. He wanted to ask her who she truly was, why she had come to such a forgotten world, why her presence felt larger than the night sky itself. But he bit down on the words, they stuck in his throat. Unspoken. The ship lifted slightly from the ground, its panels glowing brighter, its hum steady and powerful. The mechanic stepped back, shielding his eyes as dust swirled around him. He felt the vibration run through the earth and through his bones. He watched as the vessel rose higher, its grace unlike anything he had ever witnessed. He had seen ships take off in fury, with roaring engines and blinding fire, but this vessel ascended with elegance, with a quiet majesty that made his heart pound as the ship hovered. She stood at the entrance, her figure outlined against the light. She raised a hand slightly, not a wave, not a farewell, but a gesture that carried meaning. He could not grasp, his throat tightened, and he wanted to speak, to call out, to stop her from leaving, though he could not explain why. But the words never came, only silence, as he stood frozen in the glow. And the ship rose higher, breaking through the dusty clouds above the colony until it was gone, a streak of silver vanishing into the endless sky. The mechanic stood alone, credits heavy in his pocket, yet his heart heavier still. He had earned enough to keep himself alive for many months, but it no longer felt like survival was enough. He had touched something greater, something vast, and it had already slipped beyond his reach. He turned slowly back toward his empty shop, the night now dark once more, the glow of the vessel gone, the silence pressing down like a weight. He walked with heavy steps, yet in his mind her gaze lingered, her presence echoed, and though he did not understand it, he knew his life would never be the same again. Far above the dusty colony, the vessel pierced the clouds and descended into the silent ocean of stars, its hull shimmering as the last traces of damage faded into nothing. The woman moved through the corridors of her ship, her cloak falling away. As the disguise she had worn slipped into memory, her figure seemed to change with every step, her bearing straighter, her presence no longer quiet but radiant, her eyes now sharp with power, her voice when she spoke to the ship resonant as though the stars themselves answered. She stepped into the command chamber, where light flowed like rivers across the walls, forming holograms of distant systems, fleets, and worlds. Her throne of crystal and steel rose from the center, glowing faintly as she took her seat. The vast chamber bowed to her presence. She was no longer the traveler she had pretended to be, no longer the stranded wanderer seeking the help of a desperate mechanic. She was the empress of a hidden empire, her true identity unfurling. Like a storm across the silence of space, her attendants appeared in shimmering forms projected from distant corners of the galaxy. Their voices filled with reverence as they addressed her as sovereign, their faces bowed as they awaited her command. She did not reveal the details of her journey. She only told them that her vessel had been restored, and that she had found what she had been searching for. Her words carried layers of meaning that none dared question, though curiosity flickered across their faces. In her mind, the image of the mechanic lingered, his hands steady even when the ship fought against him. His body frail yet unbroken, his spirit unyielding. She remembered the way he refused to quit even when blinded by light. Even when exhaustion tore at his limbs, he had shown a strength that no training, no army could teach. And though he did not know it, his struggle had left a mark upon her, a reminder that true power was not always measured in wealth or armies, but in the refusal to surrender. She sat upon her throne, her empire stretching invisibly across the stars, yet her thoughts drifted back to the dusty yard, where a man labored alone with broken tools and empty cupboards. She wondered if he knew the weight of what he had done, if he realized that his perseverance had touched a sovereign who commanded legions. She doubted it. He would return to his world, his shop, his quiet survival, never knowing that he had crossed paths with the empress of a hidden empire. And the colony, the mechanic lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The credits sat stacked on the table, enough to feed him for months, enough to pay debts, yet none of it filled the void in his chest. He thought of the woman, her steady gaze, her soft voice, her mysterious presence. He could not shake the feeling that she had been far more than she appeared. He told himself it was foolish. He told himself she was only a traveler, passing through. Yet in the deepest part of his mind, a fire stirred. The stars burned silently above both of them, the empress in her throne among galaxies, and the mechanic in his broken shop beneath dusty skies. Their lives now bound by an invisible thread. Neither could fully see, one destined to command empires, and the other destined to endure. Yet perhaps one day their paths would cross again.